it's about honoring the ancestors and telling their stories in a respectful way. It's not just about putting information together. I think it's very spiritual. And at times when I was working on it, my friends would tell you, I would cry.
Hey, family, welcome to another episode of the Black Man's Roundtable. I am your host, Rodney Butler. First of all, I want to thank from the bottom of my heart all of our very loyal listeners and followers of the Black Man's Roundtable into this new year of 2025. I want to say Happy New Year to you guys, but also welcome you to our very first episode of Season 3. So it's been 3 years, a little over 3 years actually, that we've been doing, this roundtable, this Black Man's Roundtable. And I just want to thank not only all of our new followers, but those who have been with us since day one. The great thing about this episode is we have a very, very, very special guest. In fact, we have a treat for you tonight for this episode with Dr. Ife Williams. I'm sure many of you have seen the promo for this episode, and I'm sure that you are looking very, very forward to this episode, especially for those people who maybe thought that we were a docile kind of folks, a docile kind of people, as we were enslaved in this country. But Dr. Ife Williams is going to let you know that that is not the case. So without further ado, I'm going to read her bio. Which is about 4 or 5 pages, but we got this thing down to about a half a page in order to not run the entire show. Dr. Ife Williams holds a BA in 1976 from Lincoln University, MA degree, a Master's of Arts degree in 1981, and a PhD in 1988 in political science from Transatlantic University. She is a political science and African American history professor at Delaware County Community College in Pennsylvania. Her manuscript, Police Brutality, a Philadelphia Story, published by the Lexington Press in May 2023, has received acclaimed reviews. The recipient of a Mellon ACLS Community College Faculty Fellowship for Enhancement of Digital Map on African and African Descendants, Resistance Against Enslavement, building upon decades of scholarships on slavery, brings the stories of revolts from across the globe into an interactive digital modality. You will be told to follow along on blackslaverevolts.org throughout this podcast. So be ready for that. But with that, the Smithsonian Institute incorporated her markers for ship revolts in their exhibit In the Wake of Slavery that opened at the National African American Museum on December 13th, 2024. Dr. Williams was recently awarded a National Endowment of Humanities to create a second map of African and African American resistance, 1944 to 1994. A 3-time Fulbright Award recipient as a specialist lecturer at the University of Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and lecturer researcher on reparations at the University of West Indies, Barbados. She also served as past president of the African Heritage Studies Association from 2018 to 2021. And without further ado, let's hear it. Let's bring on Dr. Ife Williams. How you doing, Doc?
Fine, thanks. I want to thank you for having me on your show tonight.
It is an absolute honor and pleasure for us to have you on. We are going to get started right into this conversation. We're going to jump right into it because we really informed and almost hyped up our followers and listeners for this episode, because we know a lot of people don't know about all of these slave revolts because, Hollywood and certain books and those kind of things have kind of, led people to believe that I guess we kind of enjoyed this thing, but it just wasn't the case, and I know you're going to help us understand that tonight. So without further ado, again, what I would recommend to the followers, to the listeners, to the watchers of this podcast, is to go to, let me make sure I say it correctly, make sure you go to blackslaverevolts.org and follow along as we have this conversation for this episode. And so one of the first things I want to talk about, Dr. Ife, is about the project. This obviously is a huge project, like we talked about in your intro, recognized by the Smithsonian Institute. Is how did this project come about?
Well, I didn't include it in my bio, but I am a budding documentarian. I completed one documentary, 26 minutes, 30 seconds. Took me forever. It's called Africa is Not a Zoo. And it's on my personal website, drifewilliams.com, one word. And it looks at the displacement of indigenous people in Africa for game parks, because every time you think about Africa, people talk about the big five, the elephants and lions and tigers. I'm like, people live there.
Exactly.
And so while I was in the studio working on it, I asked the tech about doing a project on slave revolts. And they suggested that I do a Google map. And I'm like, oh, okay. And even with my knowledge of history, I was naive because I thought, maybe 50 at the most. So they showed me how to do a Google map, which was fairly simple, and I started it and I uploaded text, video, images, because I'm really into images.
Right.
And I wanted it to be a scholarly work. I didn't want it to be just like a Google map, just gives you basic information about a restaurant or hotel, whatever you're looking for.
Exactly.
I wanted to have the full citations and show that the research was done. So I started working on it. And then when I got up to 50 revolts, I'm like, okay. Then it was 150. Then it was 230. I'm like, oh my God. And I just kept uncovering. And I was surprised myself. And the map has 263 revolts on land and 100 at sea. Now, there are documented at least 500 revolts at sea.
Wow.
But what I did was I selected the ones that I thought were successful. And what did I choose as my success rate? Where the crew was killed and everybody got away. So that brought me down to 100, and that's what the Smithsonian found. Oh, I put it up on African Heritage Studies Association website because at the time I was president, so I figured I'd do what I want to do. But it was there under layers and layers and layers of tabs. So I don't know how Smithsonian found it, but they did find it, and they just wanted to use the ship revolts, and that's part of their exhibit. So that's basically how I got started. Now, anything that you do in Google, of course, Google owns.
Yep.
So the first thing I had to do was take it out of Google and put it on in another map format. And that's when I went to Upworks, which is a site if you need anyone to do any technical work for you, any proofreading,
Yes.
whatever.
I've actually used it before.
You used, okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So I went on Upworks. I was trying to find an African descendant because to me, this whole project is sacred. It's about honoring the ancestors and telling their stories in a respectful way. It's not just about putting information together. I think it's very spiritual. And at times when I was working on it, my friends will tell you, I would cry. I'm like so tired.
Wow.
But I would, somebody told me to call on the ancestors every day to help you. And I did, and that's how it came about. But anyway, back to Upworks, I digress. I went on there, I couldn't find, I just found a lot of Ukrainians, a lot of Europeans. I'm like, oh man. So I went on it about 3 or 4 times, and then I just broke down. I said, okay, well, I'll use a woman from Ukraine. That's as close as I can get. And I went on one day, and this little black face popped up. I'm like, uh-oh, who's this? And it was Stephen from Kenya. And I'm like, oh my goodness, where did he come from? So I got in touch with him and asked him about different map software, if he knew it. And he told me, he says, I know JavaScript. You know JavaScript, you can do anything.
That's right.
And I said, okay. So I talked to him about it, and I told him I really wanted something that would honor the ancestors. And I hope some of your listeners are going to the website, Black Slave Revolts, put a S on the end.org. And you can see he did a spectacular job in putting that site together. So basically that's how the project was born. And I started out with Junius Rodriguez' Encyclopedia of Slave Revolts. I also use Herbert Aptheker's Negro Rebellions. And from there, I started doing archival research and, built on those books.
Right.
So using Aptheker and Rodriguez, the whole question of categorization, what makes a slave revolt? And to them, it's the number of people that are involved, just like mass shootings, more than 4 or 5 people's mass. But the punishment for thinking about revolting was just as harsh as even going through it. So I included the planning of a revolt all the way up. And here I want to say something about language, because I noticed in talking to you, you always use the term enslavement.
Yes.
What you have to realize, what I learned, is that the internet is driven by words. Even though I'm very visual, it's words. And you're not going to get...
Or as they now say, algorithms.
Yeah. But you're not going to get anyone, well, there might be a certain class of people, your listeners, perhaps, who would go online and look for the enslavement of Africans and African descendants throughout the diaspora. Who's going to do that? They're going to look for slave. They're going to look for revolts. They're going to look for rebellions. So even though ideologically I am with you with enslavement and that we were not slaves, we were made into slaves, I had to use that language to make it accessible. And
exactly.
Yeah. And secondly, when I was working on it, the audience I had in mind was really a 15-year-old. I wanted this project to touch young people in such a way that I could keep them engaged on the site. So each one of the markers is different. So you don't know what's going to pop up. So you have to keep on going. Like I said, some have videos, some have text. Everything has an image. Then the citations. Yes. So to keep them right there into it. And the first thing I wanted them to do is just look at the map.
Right.
And see, because a lot of people don't know much about the enslavement of Africans throughout the world. And I think what inspired me there is Dr. Joseph Harris of Howard University, his map on the African diaspora. You can Google that. And he shows everywhere that Africans were enslaved throughout the world. And I've always loved that map. I've used it. So I knew everywhere there were African people, there were revolts. So even though I used the Rodriguez and the Aptheker texts, I know wherever you had Africans, there had to be a revolt. So when I got to the limits of their book, I start looking regionally and doing research on that particular country and that area and looking for revolts. And the major challenge there is that a lot of the revolts are not written up
Right.
because the masters, of course, didn't want the enslaved to find out about it. So some of them, you have to go visit the place and you find more information, or if you know another language, you can get more information. So it's an evolving project. And when I put it on AHSA's African Heritage Studies Association website, I invited people, please, if you know of a revolt in your area that's not here, please let me know so I can add it to it. So, I mean, I guess this is going to go on forever. I did get a couple of responses, but not too many. Shows I was pretty thorough, huh?
Yeah. And you know what though, Dr. Ife, before we get into the map piece, again, I just want to remind people to, as you watch this podcast, as you listen to this podcast, go to Black Slave Revolts, like she said, with an S, blackslaverevolts.org, and follow along as you, go through that website and listen to this podcast. And the reason I want to stop you a little bit before we get into the maps is because, like you said, you really put it at the fingertip. First of all, when you go and you click on maps onto the website, and you see this map for the very first time, and you see all of these locations like you do on any Google map, and you realize the sheer number of the slave revolts, it captures you. You instantly feel a sense of pride because you know that our ancestors just didn't lay down and just didn't allow this to happen. And it's not even to mention the ones at sea, right? The ones at sea. But I just want to remind everybody to go to the website, make sure you go to the website, make sure you take a look at the map. And when you click on it, when you click on whatever, the location icon, because that's basically a revolt, make sure you look at the information, because like you said, Dr. Ife, you want it to be to where your audience was, you were thinking about the 15-year-old who, they want it at their fingertips, and this map really puts it at their fingertips.
Right. Okay. Well, let's start with the ship revolts a little bit.
Okay.
The original map, the one that Smithsonian accession, had 100 revolts on it.
Okay.
And what I want to make very clear, that approximately 70%, this is my percentage, of those revolts took place on the coast of Africa. Most people think our ancestors were standing on the coast just pushing us out there. Here, leave, get on the ship.
Right.
They were fighting tooth and nail right there on the coast to end it, to stop it, to save our ancestors and free them, right? People were complicit. You always have complicity.
Yeah.
You think about the drug trade. People are complicit. But when we look at Africa, I want to make it clear, what did complicity mean? Okay? Benin was the only country that had their economy for a short period of time totally dependent on the slave trade. The other countries did not. All right? And in many cases, if the chiefs did not agree with the European, then they were exiled or killed. So we have to do a whole new definition of complicity. This is part of the misinformation to cut us off from our African brothers and sisters. Yeah, they sold you. Come on now. Yeah, we have to look at that. So what I did, I took the 100 and I brought it down to 58 because with 58 I could put more information. And if someone, I don't think anybody would do this, if someone happened to look at all 58, you'll get a holistic view of what went on those ships. Okay. The question I get asked most is, what about the women? And this is very interesting with the ships. The number of women on a ship determined its propensity to have a revolt. Because women and children, and one of the ships I have there, it was a little boy, would be on deck, and they could see where the weapons were stored. They could see the habits of the crew, and they took that information to the men, because the men were separated from the women on most of these ships. And that's when you would have a revolt. I would say every revolt that I mapped, there were women involved. Not only were women involved, some women were masterminds of the revolt. And my favorite is Solitude in Guadeloupe. If you open that up, it's 1802, Solitude. You could see that Solitude was visibly pregnant. She was had to be about 7 months pregnant. She led a revolt along with Delgas. They lured the French into a fort, and then they blew the fort up, and they killed over 400 Frenchmen. She escaped. She was captured and incarcerated until the baby was born. When the baby was born, they gave the baby to her former master, and then they executed her. Another one of my favorites is 1734, Marie Angelique in Montreal. And that has a little video with it. Just give you another aside. What I did was, and I'm telling you this because I'm not high tech, so anybody can do this. I created over about 200 PowerPoints.
Wow.
And then I had an audio party. I invited about 15 of my friends over and I fed them. And I had them read the PowerPoints. So I had my girlfriend from Jamaica, she did Nanny. I had some friends from Haiti who did that revolt and so on. So for Marie Angelique, that's one of my friends. If you open it up, she does a great job there. Okay. And this is kind of an aside, but this is where my team comes in. I don't know what I was thinking. Even as a scholar, you make mistakes. Right. When I was putting those PowerPoints together, I was pulling images off the internet and I didn't put the citations. Oh my God. So I got some students, 4 students from Delaware County Community College, and I had them do reverse image search. And they did reverse image on, I would easily say 500 images.
Wow.
Yeah, to get the citation. So all you have to do is go into Google and you'll see what says image. Yes. You put any image in there and it'll tell you what it is. So I had to backtrack. I think that was the biggest challenge there. But again, they did most of the work. But anyway, back to the women. There were many. And Rodney mentioned my new map, which I'll tell you a little bit by the end. Sure. What I did there was I made a separate marker for women. I made a purple marker with the sign of a woman with a fist in it so that people could easily find women. For the slavery revolt map, you kind of have to look for the women, but there are quite a few. Maroons. Now I really had to make a decision here because Maroons, that's a whole nother data set. And maybe one of your listeners will do that. Everywhere you had enslavement, you had Maroons. Now, there were some revolts that were successful because of the existence of the Maroons.
Now remind the audience of what the Maroons are. Yep.
Oh, that's where the runaway enslaved would go and hide out.
Yes.
Okay. So those instances where the Maroon had a direct relationship with the revolt, I included.
Okay.
So I left a lot of, because it's like a rabbit hole. You know how you go online, you're looking for one thing, and then 2 hours later, you're like, well, what was I looking for?
Yep.
You're lost. So I had to I mean, I really thought about it because the Maroons are very important, but I'm like, you know what, Ife, that's going to take you somewhere else. So I limited that. And we had a number of Maroon wars in Dominica and Jamaica, Brazil, and some of these communities, especially in Brazil, they still exist. People still live there, Quilombos. I think the biggest Maroon establishment in the U.S. was in Florida, Fort Mose, with the Seminole. So if you look at 1835, the Seminole, you'll see Florida. Now, causes. It seems very obvious. You say, oh, everybody was enslaved. That's what caused it. But it's a little different than that. We have to look at slavery as labor. So you have people who are working without being paid, but they're still being controlled. And also you have to keep in mind the time element. We're talking about 400 years. So you have all kinds of nuances and stories, things that happened in the beginning, a little different from the end. I'd say the majority of the revolts happened in the mid 1700s, after Haiti, going into the 1800s. By then, you're talking about third, fourth generation of enslaved people.
Right.
So I'm saying all this to tell you that sometimes it was about negotiation. All right. You had in Antigua, 1831, all they wanted was to have Sunday off and to be able to go to what we call like a Congo Square and sell their goods, see their friends, whatever. That's all they wanted. All right. Of course, they didn't get it, and that led to revolt. Another one that really, really went wrong was in Jamaica in 1831, the Baptist War. They were laborers. All they wanted was a day off, shorter hours, maybe some food. So you think about it. It was a labor. And then what do the Europeans do, as they always do? Overreact.
Yeah.
And massacred a number of people.
So these were the original labor unions, if you will.
Right.
And so, like you said, they, but now, today, you act like you own and you came about with labor unions. The majority of the people. So I say that to say that, like you just said, what did they do when they asked for more food? They asked for days off. They asked for Sundays off, religious purposes and all this kind of stuff, which you built this whole entire, a large portion of this slave trade and this whole enslavement was based on religion. At least the religion, they based it on religion, but yet you don't want to give the people a day off for religion or time off for religion. And then, like you said, when they asked for these things, when they negotiated these things, they were massacred. So, hey, look, here we are some 400 years later, and people are trying to get rid of unions and do away with unions. And who knows what extreme they'll go to. Back then, it was massacre. So who knows? I'm not saying somebody's going to massacre anybody, but history is history.
Right.
But thanks for that. Thanks for that, Dr. Ife.
Yeah. I thought that was pretty insightful. And Mm. Anyway, let me move along. Some things I have to hold myself back.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine. But so what we can do is we can kind of transition, though I think that was a good transition.
Mhm.
It'll be a good transition. Again, if you're following the website, everybody, at Black Slave Revolts, one word, blackslaverevolts.org. If you are following, this is kind of a good transition into a good segue into the transatlantic enslavement and trafficking of African people, from talking about the maps and talking about just this transatlantic enslavement, and Dr. Ife, if you could just talk a little bit about that. I know that you on the website you talk about the dispersion of 1873 with Joseph E. Harris, and if you want to expound on that, or however you feel that you want to do it, but let's transition a little bit into the enslavement, the transatlantic enslavement of African people.
Mhm. Well,
A lot. That's a lot. I know.
it's a lot. It's a lot. And it is just unmerciful. Um, I don't even know where to begin. If we go back to just capturing African people
Okay.
and putting them in what they called castles, I don't know where they got that term from. It's amazing that they could even survive at that level. Right there in Ghana, in Elmina, they had an underground tunnel where when they first saw a ship, now you've all been to the sea and you look out, a ship could be miles and miles away from you.
Yes, miles away.
As soon as they saw that, they would herd the Africans down into this tunnel where they would stay until a ship came to keep them from running away. It's just horrific. Right there in Goree Island, I think one of the saddest things I saw was they had a dungeon just for children.
Yeah.
That they separated from their parents, and then one for women, and back in Ghana, they have one with a skull on the door where there was no air. So a person would be put in there and they would scream and scream and scream until they would suffocate and die. So this gave me a whole nother perspective on slavery, because we usually start with what happened here in America with Jamestown.
Right.
But when we go back to Africa, I don't know how they lived through that. It was like 20% people died.
Yeah.
And then once you get on the ships, oh boy.
Dr. Ife, I remember seeing, I think I talked about this on one of my episodes in the very first season of the Black Man's Roundtable, where I remember seeing this picture. This wasn't a picture; it was a painting, portrait of this. It was obviously in Africa, where they was getting ready to trade, do some slave trading, and I saw this European. It is a picture of this European licking the forehead of one of the Africans who was on his knees. He was already shackled, and I'm like, what kind of gay stuff is going on right here? I just automatically assume maybe this is some kind of homosexual thing. Why are you licking this guy? And so, and I believe the portrait is at the Smithsonian Institute as well. And it's called, I could be wrong, but I think it's called the lick test. The lick test. And it is, so what they were doing, I guess they had learned to, lick the forehead of the African, and for sodium content. And if it was real salty, then there was a better, I think there was a better chance of them surviving the voyage, right? From that transatlantic trip,
Right.
and it just made me think about, wow, I wonder how much does this have to do with, the Africans that survived. This, if it was true, I don't know. I didn't do any further research, but if it was true about the sodium, that they would taste, the salt that they would taste as they would lick them, then now you have people, Africans that retain sodium, who survive this whose chances were higher of surviving that transatlantic slave voyage. Now they are, having children together. It makes me wonder, how much does it have to do with hypertension, for instance, in African Americans? Because hypertension is not like a big thing that, from what I know, as far as the continent of Africa. But if you put a bunch of people survive a voyage who happens to retain sodium, and we know sodium is a huge factor in hypertension, it just made me wonder about even all that stuff, But yeah, I think it's called the lick test. But it makes me just with you talking, it takes me back to that. I saw that portrait. I don't know, many years ago, but I think I talked about it on one of the earlier episodes of the Roundtable. So yeah, it's like you said, it's a lot. There's a lot to think about.
A lot. And then the other thing is, it was cheaper to work an African to death and then just replenish your supply. So your average lifespan was 7 years.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. And while you were talking, it made me think of Barbados because of the sugar.
Yeah.
They they tell a story, when they were young, they didn't have food. They would have go to school with a cup of sugar. That was your lunch. So Barbados has the highest incident of diabetes and amputees in the world.
See?
See?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's part of reparations. Everybody's looking at just the check and, oh, you want a plantation, but it's much bigger than that. It's our health, our mental health, the trauma that we've gone through, post-traumatic slave syndrome, what we're dealing with today. And I always use the example of oh God, this is from Joy Leary's book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. She says, if you go into a market and you see a white woman with a little child, what will that woman say about her child? Oh, he's so smart. He knows his ABCs, right?
Yeah.
If you see a black woman with a child, what's the first thing she's going to say? He's so bad. And where's that come? That's directly from slavery. Because when the master walked up and said, oh, let me see little Joe. Oh, no, master, you don't want little Joey. He's bad. That's direct behavior that we do, and we don't realize it. That's been passed down. Same behaviors.
Absolutely. Just recently had that conversation about, why it tends to be so hard sometimes for black families, black mothers in particular, to bond with their child, or to say anything positive about their child. Well, if someone is trying to enslave your child, you're not going to talk about their accolades. You're not going to talk about the wonderful things about them. And that conversation spun from having a conversation about epigenetics, and how this is actually passed down through the gene pool. And so when you talk about reparations, we're talking about something that that you actually, because of enslavement, that you affected a group of people. I like to say a race of people, because we know races are made up construct, for greed and money. But you affected a group of people in all types of ways, psychologically, mentally, physically, psychologically, and so so it's way more than just in enslavement, as you know, as
Right.
they would say. Yeah.
We're only 4 generations out. Most people don't realize that. 4 generations.
Yeah.
And we're not even talking about the post-terror of slavery during Reconstruction, the reign of
Exactly.
terror, the lynchings. My mother saw her cousin lynched,
Yeah.
and she had nightmares her entire life. So you imagine she's carrying children and she's screaming and hollering, and my grandmother's screaming. I don't know what happened to her, but it's just passed down, just this trauma.
Passed down. It's trauma. Yeah.
Yeah, and we don't realize what's going on with this.
And like you're saying, if only 4 generations out,
Mm-hmm.
but even those 4 generations, look at what we went through, since 1865,
Right,
Reconstruction, Jim Crow,
right.
so yeah, okay, it was out of slavery, but in the end, slavery is not over. I mean,
It's not
slavery
over.
is still legal, as as far as what is the 14th Amendment, it's still legal as long as for punishment. So
Mm-hmm.
so guess what? The prisons
Mm-hmm.
are loaded
Mm-hmm.
with a bunch of primarily black men who probably shouldn't be in
Right,
prison,
right.
but that is the only legal slavery. So slavery was not, people say slavery was outlawed in America. It was not.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Slavery is still legal as long as it is used in a form of a punishment, which is
Mm-hmm.
prisons and jails all over this country. And we know who is disproportionately jailed and in prison.
Okay.
So yeah,
Yeah,
it's still there.
yeah, that's the 13th Amendment.
Oh,
And the
13th. What I
right.
said, 14th. Yeah, 13th
Yeah,
Amendment.
it's the third.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're saying the 14th because that was on the news today with Trump trying to get rid of birthright,
Yeah,
and they're saying
the 13th, 14th, and
14th
15th
Amendment.
Amendment is going to be in the news quite a lot over the next
Yeah.
4 years. So get ready to learn those three. Those three. I tell people, but
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah. You
yeah,
have to know that.
yeah.
You have to know that. But
So yes,
mhm,
yeah. So but yeah. So I think that when we think about just slavery in the whole. I know, in the pre-show, I talked to you about how I've talked to this audience about um, the different forms of slavery and that kind of
mhm,
thing, and and so I just want for people, I always try to remind people that chattel slavery is was a slavery that was practiced here in America, in North America, and it was different from anywhere else. Most of the time, when
mhm,
people, historically, when people thought about slavery, or when people even mentioned slavery, it was more of an indentured servitude kind of thing,
mhm,
where they say the new slavery, where they say debt. All right, debt is the new slavery. Well, debt was always slavery, right? In other words,
mhm.
back in the day, way back, 700, 800 years ago, when you had a debt and you couldn't pay it off, you were enslaved, kind of an indentured
Mhm.
servant, until you pay that, until 6 months of, I don't know, cleaning somebody's house or whatever, or, whatever it is that it takes. But that's how
Mhm.
you paid off your debt. So I tell people all the time, no, debt is not the new slavery. Debt has always been slavery.
That's
and
right.
and when you are in debt, you need to look at it as enslavement. But anyway, I say that to say that is what slavery kind of was, and that you couldn't be born into slavery, and it wasn't a cradle to grave kind of thing, right? Until chattel slavery came about, and that's what we had here in North America, and that was perfected. And so a lot of the times, people, when you thought about it, they say, such as, was slavery been around since the beginning of the time? Yes, it was, but chattel slavery haven't been around since the beginning
Right.
of the time. And so I
Right.
just make sure that I put that right in their face, Dr. Ife, and say, okay, explain that. Get get yourself out
Right.
of that one, but yeah. So
But the real significance of chattel slavery is that it's the only slavery in history where the person was equated to real estate.
yeah,
So you could be sold, traded, whatever. That never occurred before.
Never occurred before.
Yeah,
And
that's
that's
the
kind of what
difference.
chattel is, you know. So,
Yeah,
but it
your
was
real estate.
your real estate, you know.
Hmm.
It was never, you know, done like that before. And so
Right.
there's
It's
definitely
different.
some unique things about, you know what we've been through. But
Right.
I would also, like you said, it's only been 4 generations that we have been free of, in you know, being people that were enslaved based on the 13th Amendment. Now, that also, what we have to remember, I think, too, Dr. Ife, is that also gives us, you know, a certain bit of respect around the world that our people don't quite know about. There are people who study and know, you know, your map and your work and the things that you've contributed, who does not look and sound like us, like me and you know? And I always find that kind of, I don't know, bittersweet, if you will,
Hmm.
because there are more people, it seems, around the world, and I'm a pretty well traveled guy who understands and knows, and who know what we went through and how long we went through it and how short of a time we've been out of what we've been through. Now, what I
Hmm.
say that to say this is there are people who their people were enslaved for 1,000 years, you know, from their region or where they're from. Their people were enslaved 1,000 years, and they've been out of slavery for 5,000 years, and they are still um, in a terrible place. They are still looked at as second, third class citizens in their own environment, right? People look at us knowing that African Americans been through chattel slavery and went through it for over 400 years, you know, since
Hmm.
the marker 1619 to 1865 or whatever, right? But you know, we know that some things happened, you know, before then. But anyway, even if you use that, even if you use 1619 to 1865, but we've only been out of it, like you said, for 4 generations.
Hmm.
Okay, not even 150 years, and so,
Right.
and look at the impact that we make on this country.
Right.
People look at us like, wow,
Hmm.
like you were in shackles, not even, you know, less than 150 years ago. And that's, I think, the way that we need to move throughout the aircraft, if you will. I think that's the way we need to move throughout this country, is knowing what we've been through, to study, you know, what others have been through, because people study and look at what we've been through. And I think that we need um, to hold our heads high,
Right.
while at the same time demanding to be repaired for how we've been injured.
That's right. I want to go back to something you had mentioned
Okay.
about other people who study us and kind of segue back to my map.
Okay, great. It's a great place to segue back to.
New history that's done predominantly by whites. We have one brother, Earl Henderson, but the rest of them are white,
Mhm.
are looking at the Civil War as the second largest slave revolt after Haiti. This is all new scholarship. And if you look at the map, 1861, you'll see I have a number of citations, and all but one are white. And the Civil War is so interesting because what happens here? The Africans fled. They just left the plantation and they fought on both sides. Okay. Yeah. Some, of course, had to, and some didn't want to leave
Right.
slavery. I mean, things are good here, right? But what we see is a shift in theology because the first couple of 100 years, remember, Black people were told you were cursed by Ham, and that's why you were a slave.
Exactly.
By the time we get up to 1800s, we get your Nat Turner and these other Blacks who say, no, this is not, God did not curse us to be slaves. And this is where this swells up, and they start liberating themselves. It's that theological shift. And we see that again in the 1960s. and the interpretation of Jesus. And we, of course, James Cone's work on Black theology, right? Where we see Jesus as a rebel, a fighter. And that thinking is what undergirds the civil rights movement, right? So all this is contemporary scholarship here. Look at me, okay.
No, go
which
ahead.
is which is a good segue to my second map. I don't know how much time we have left,
No, you're good.
but what I did was I was applying for another grant to work on the slave revolt map.
Okay.
And then at the last hour, I was like, you know what? I had to get off of this plantation. When my girlfriend said, you on the ship, you got to come off.
No, that's
You know,
right.
because it's an emotional toll, going through a lot of these stories. So at the last minute, I said, you know what? I'm going to do civil rights movements and anti-colonial movements. And what's foremost in my mind, which a lot of people don't know about, are the armed revolts in Africa, Guinea-Bissau, Mozambique, Angola. Oh, because a lot of people know the Mau Mau in Kenya,
Right.
right? But what about all these other revolts? They don't know of them. So that was primary in my mind. And so I says, okay, I'm going to do 1944 to 1994. Why did I select 1994? That's the end technically of apartheid. And I'm looking at this. So again, going back to the theory, really reality, that slavery is labor. I couldn't really talk about 1944 without going back to the 1930s and those early labor movements that Black people were part of. And so so it says 44, but I actually go all the way back. And just like the slave revolt map, when you look at it, you see Black people all over the world who fought. And the markers there, I hope you can tell, those are chains. And then I have them red, black, green, and yellow, of course, from the Honorable Marcus Garvey, who was just posthumously pardoned
Yes.
just
Yes.
last week.
Yep.
And the new map, the second map, they have fist. And that map is going to be on the same site, and it's going to go live March 1st. So I'm still working on that one. And you'll see the same thing. And one thing that really sticks out to me, of course, was the Black Power movement and how it was internationalized. And so I have markers in India, Israel,
Yeah.
Australia, of course, in Europe. Only places where people claim to be Black. I'm not dealing with anybody else's history. Let somebody else do it.
That's
I
right.
only deal with Black people. All right. So, and it's not a competition about who was more oppressed. It doesn't matter. We're all oppressed at some level, at somewhere in history. But my concern, especially now with this whole CRT movement and trying to get this history removed, is to have our history right in front of us so that we can learn about not only what was going on here in America, but what was going on in the Caribbean, what was going on in London, what was going on in Brazil.
Exactly.
Right? And see how we are tied together in our struggle. Because look, a white boy said this. Emmanuel Wallerstein in 1980 said, racism is global.
Yes.
And it is. There isn't anywhere in the world you can go to escape racism. Now, in the 1920s, 1930s, you could say, yeah, I'm going to Europe. Richard Wright and a few other people, because there were only a few of them, right?
Right.
And this goes back to Derek Bell's theory that as long as you have a handful of Black, white people don't care, especially if they're talented. Come on,
That's
Josephine Baker. Oh, we love her. But what happens when those numbers climb up? We go right back to the stereotypes. And everywhere, I'm telling you, it shouldn't be amazing, but it is amazing to me. Every country I look at right now, I'm working on Latin America, in Colombia, in Ecuador, Guatemala. Everywhere you have African descendants, you get the same narrative.
That's right. And you know what,
We
Dr.
were all
Ife? Yeah.
segregated.
And that's why I think on one of my other podcasts on this Black Man franchise, I can't remember which one it was, but I just mentioned about how going into 2025 where I'm no longer using, well, I'm no longer using, but I'm definitely minimizing the word racism out of my mouth. I'm more talking about, you're going to hear me say more Black hatred.
Oh,
You see what I'm saying? Because all over the globe, it is the same.
it is.
And yeah,
They hate us, Rodney. They hate us.
just literally. And if
Black
you
people don't
don't
understand that.
understand,
They hate us.
go outside of your county, go outside of your state, but more like to go outside of this country, and you will see that it is Black hatred. It's not so much, racism. It's I don't even want to put an ism on it. It's more than that. It's somebody look at you and just literally hate you because your skin has quite a bit of melanin in it, and so yeah, I think that is I think that is said perfectly. That is where we need to be. We need to concentrate, on us. And I think if we truly understand, like you're saying,
Right.
Dr. Ife, if we truly understand the diaspora, okay, of Black people across this globe, then we will truly be able to not fall in the same traps that we did before. But if we only study and if we only look at from, when we got to these shores,
Right.
you know what I'm saying? You just literally, for talking about for those scholars, you literally just put yourself in an echo chamber because you started from Jamestown
Mm.
and you stayed here. But if you were to really look at the diaspora, we would never fall for the okie doke anymore. So I'm with you 100% on that. The diaspora worldwide is what we need to look at, what our Black scholars need to study. That is the information they need to bring back to us so we can better know what to do with that. So I agree. So, Doc, I tell you what I want to talk about, we have a few more minutes, and before we get out of here, because this is such a great work, you will not be a stranger on this platform because, especially over the next several years, we really need to hear from scholars like yourself, who scholars who are unapologetically Black and who want to talk about us and how we're not going to ignore what we've been through. We're not going to, if we do that, we are only doomed, as far as the future. And so, what I would like to talk about is, or what I'd like for you to talk about is, the team. This took a lot of work. And as brilliant as you are, we know that you could not do it all alone. And I know that there are probably certain individuals or certain aspects of this work as far as the team part of it that you would like to talk about. And I really want you to talk about that if you can.
Well, actually, I worked on this thing over a period of years. So all the descriptions I did.
Okay.
Because I want to be responsible for what's there.
Got it.
And if anybody has any questions, to come to me. Where the team comes in is, like I mentioned before, I had my students do the reverse image searches. Oh, that went on forever. But then if you notice, when you open the website, you'll see scrolling at the top animations. I hired 6 young people, graphic artists, to do animations on some of the revolts. And I gave them all the same talk. No, we're paying homage to the ancestors. It has to be very respectful. And then I guess altogether, I maybe have about 20. You would not see their work unless you go to that particular revolt.
Got it.
So that's why I selected 5 of them and let them scroll across the top so that you can see them. And they're just phenomenal. One of them that I really like was done by, how do you like this? Angela Davis Johnson.
Wow.
That's her name. Yeah.
Wow.
She did the one on the ships. And you have to look at it. It'll just bring tears to your eyes. She made the ships out of bodies.
Wow.
And so I hired the same group to work on the second map. And I keep giving them deadlines that float. They just kind of float by them. So one of them told me, if we were white, we'd be finished by now. Because they said they had to, even though I gave them the narrative, it wasn't enough. You know, they had to do their own research. They had to commune with the ancestors, and they had to get their artistic juices flowing. I'm like, please.
Yeah.
So so they really did some phenomenal work.
Right.
You have to look at that.
So a lot of the team was really around because you had done so much work, like you said, building up to this. So a lot of the team was the which is out. Please remember to visit the website. Remember to visit the website. And so the team was really the graphics, the web. I'm not the graphics, but the website and getting all those graphics, those visuals together, and bringing it. Because like I said, I think it's brilliant. Like you're saying, the second map of even the color schemes, the red, the yellow, and the green, the fists, and all of that. I think that it's brilliant, and I think that it's really going to keep, especially the young people, really engaged because they are very, very, very visual. So,
they are. I would like to give a shout out to Scribe Video here in Philadelphia. They do, they're a nonprofit, and they teach people how to do workshops. I mean, they have workshops on editing, any form of communication, radio, what you're doing, and podcasts. So that's where I got my start with my 26-minute documentary. And and so people look at it and say, 26 minutes. But when you're editing, that 26 minutes took me almost 2 years. I'm proud of my 26 minutes.
I know that's right.
They're like, that's all you did? I'm like, you have no idea.
Have no idea. If you don't do editing and post-production stuff, you have no idea what 10 minutes can be. Yep. So
Yeah. So and my institution has really been pretty supportive. Delaware County Community College is a teaching college and not research. So I'm one of the first of the faculty to receive a grant. First one to get an NEH, second one to get an ACLS, American Council of Learned Scholars. And I think, 2 of us have Fulbrights. So they didn't really know, what do you do?
Right.
I'm supposed to be teaching. So they had to come up with a whole new program. So they were really good, my dean and the president, of releasing me from teaching.
Great.
And so that I could work on this map. And I guess I want to thank the Smithsonian. I mean, that's like beyond my wildest dreams. And I get this little email from si.edu. I'm like, what is this? I thought it was spam. So, they tell you don't open emails if you're not sure.
Right.
And I'm thinking, SI, that's not Syracuse University. I'm thinking all these schools, Savannah State. No. And I just Googled it. And it says Smithsonian. I'm like, why is the Smithsonian writing me? And they said that they came across this is their term, fantastic map.
Wow.
And that the exhibit that's currently being shown at the Smithsonian, they had been working on it for 10 years. And they said once they came upon my map, it was a quote unquote game changer
Wow.
because they said when every time you see an exhibit on slavery, it's always regional,
Mm.
right? And they wanted to do this was their first international exhibit. And what the ships did, and I really didn't understand. So y'all just want the ships? They're like, yeah, that's all we want. But what the ships did was it tied the exhibit together
Okay.
because it's going to be in Washington until June 30th. Then it opens in Rio, in Brazil, in November. From there, it goes to Belgium, Liverpool, South Africa, and Senegal. So 3 of those places where they had ship revolts. So once they go there, then they're going to do their own separate exhibit around the ship revolts. So that was kind of like a little tie-in. They wanted to show how everybody pulled together. So it was quite an honor.
Absolutely. Yep. Well, look, Dr. Ife Williams, it's been an honor for us to have you on the Black
Thank
Man's
you so much.
Roundtable.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And like I said, to our audience, Dr. Ife Williams will not be a stranger. In fact,
Right.
we plan on having her back as soon as we can for her to talk about her manuscript on police brutality, a Philadelphia story. Dr. Ife said, well, we can do it all if you want. I said, no, ma'am.
Gotta
No,
separate
ma'am.
it.
This deserves its entire own episode. And so that's what we are going to do as soon as we can get her back on. And of course,
Okay.
as she continues to develop this masterpiece of her second
Thank
map
you.
and continue to talk about the slave revolts. This is something that I hope that I know that every one of us, as we look at this and as we go against what Western culture or the colonizers taught us about our us being docile and just
Right.
happy to be slaves and just go along to get along, we should feel very, very proud about the work that Dr. Ife Williams has done, and we hope that more people will join her in doing this type of work. This
Right.
work can even go as far as to be a piece in, and this is just me talking, future of being a huge part of how do we reconcile with reparations, if you will.
Right.
So all of this stuff can be very
Right.
important. But anyway, Dr. Ife, before we get out of here, is there any? Go ahead,
I,
Doc.
I want to give you my email.
Oh no, we're about to do that now.
I forgot.
Yep. Yep, we're about
Okay.
to do that now. But before we get into closing it out, is there any? Well, I know you talked about the project coming up forward with the new map. Is there any? Is there any work or anything that you plan on doing or that you have going on here in the near future? If so, please let us know. But if not,
Mhm.
definitely give our listeners, our followers, your contact information, so they
Mhm.
can reach out to you if need be.
Yeah, I would encourage people to go to the African American History Museum in Washington, D.C. The exhibit is in the basement to the left, soon as you get down, and see In the Wake of Slavery, so that you can see a global view of enslavement. And you can see my little contribution.
Absolutely.
And my email, Black Resistance, one word, Black Resistance 215 at Gmail. Black Resistance 215 at Gmail. And I would love to hear from you. If you, after you look through the map, if you see any others that aren't there, please let me know so I can follow up, or any comments or questions, I will get back to you. That's Black Resistance 215 at gmail.com. And I want to thank you, Brother Rodney, for having me here.
It's been an
And I
honor.
really enjoyed this is my favorite topic. You could tell I'm so passionate about it.
Absolutely.
I love talking about us and what we have done. And so thank you
Unapologetic.
again.
That's what we love. And
Okay.
it's been an honor. It's been a pleasure, Dr. Williams, and we look forward to talking back with you and having you back on again.
Thank
And
you.
yes, and if you guys reach out to her by email, A lot of times you forget, but don't forget to let her know that you saw her on the Black Man's Roundtable, so she can let us know. So if you can remember to put that in there, I know everybody be so excited about when they have a question that they forget to put that little piece in there. So, but anyway, Doc, it was good having you. Great show.
Thanks
And
again.
thank you everybody out there for checking out our very first episode of our third season of the Black Man's Roundtable. For those of you who have been with us since day one, and for those of you who are just now becoming a part of this family, we appreciate you, and we are always doing this show with you in mind. So until next time, catch us on the Black Man's Roundtable the third Thursday of the month. Also catch the Black Man's Roundtable Roundup with Rodney and Rodney the second and fourth Thursday of the month, and the Black Man's Roundtable Local Lookout with Rodney and Bobby the first Thursday of the month. All episodes drop at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Until next time, we'll see you in them suites and them streets. Peace. Don't forget to check us out on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. Do you have show ideas or want to be on the show? Shoot us an email at blackmansroundtable@gmail.com. And please follow us on Facebook.
1,